步升级，防止地区局势动荡，对全球经济发展造成更大的影响。
Two of the world's most powerful nations just drew a line. On Thursday, China told the United States and Israel to immediately cease all military operations against Iran. Hours later, Russia said it would do everything to make those operations impossible. Beijing called the strikes a violation of international law. Moscow called them unprovoked armed aggression, two permanent members of the UN Security Council backing the country that Washington is bombing. That is not diplomatic noise. That is the sound of the conflict expanding beyond the Middle East. At a press briefing in Beijing, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning delivered the details. China said it opposes what it calls U.S. and Israeli military actions against Iran as violations of international law. We support Iran in safeguarding its sovereignty, security, territorial integrity, and national dignity, Mao said. She urged all relevant parties to immediately stop military operations, avoid further escalation, and prevent regional turmoil from causing greater damage to global economic growth. Relevant parties is Beijing's diplomatic shorthand for Washington and Tel Aviv. Then Mao addressed the waterway. The Strait of Hormuz and its adjacent waters are an important international trade route for goods and energy, she said. To keep the region secure and stable serves the common interests of the international community. Read in isolation, that sounds like boilerplate. Read against the backdrop of Iran reportedly granting exclusive passage to Chinese vessels. It sounds like Beijing positioning itself as the gatekeeper's partner. When pressed on accusations of double standards, comparing China's stance on Iran to its position on Ukraine, Mao pushed back. "What you said is not true," she told the reporter. "It is China's consistent position to resolve differences and disputes through dialogue and consultation, not resort to the use of force arbitrarily." She cited President Xi Jinping's four-point framework on Ukraine and a separate position document. Whether that consistency holds up to scrutiny is a question Beijing would prefer not to answer in detail. China was not the only major power to speak on Thursday. In Moscow, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov addressed an ambassadors' roundtable and went further than Beijing's careful phrasing. "We will do everything to create an atmosphere that would make American and Israeli operations against Iran impossible," Lavrov said. "That is not a call for restraint. That is a statement of intent." Lavrov said Russia would continue engaging in dialogue with regional countries and the international community, including members of the UN Security Council and General Assembly, to prevent further military escalation. Lavrov had already described the conflict as an unprovoked armed aggression of the United States and Israel against Iran. On Thursday, he went further, speculating about Washington's strategic objectives. "One of the goals of epic fury, whatever they call it, even U.S. politicians cannot say what the ultimate goal of these operations is," Lavrov said. He added, "I have no doubts that one of the goals was to divide the countries of the Persian Gulf and to divide Iran and its Arab neighbors." Lavrov also accused Washington of manufacturing a pretext. The United States was just playing a trick by claiming that Iran was unwilling to strike a nuclear deal, Lavrov said, and used the excuse to launch an attack. He warned that the precedent could accelerate nuclear proliferation. "There are more and more examples proving that if you have no nuclear weapon, you can be treated as one chooses," Lavrov said. That framing positions the war not as counter-proliferation, but as the very engine of it. It is a striking argument from a Russian foreign minister. If nations conclude that only nuclear weapons guarantee sovereignty, the incentive to acquire them grows with every conventional war that ends in regime change or assassination. Lavrov did not name specific countries. He did not need to. The implication was aimed at every non-nuclear state watching this conflict unfold and drawing its own conclusions. The diplomatic confrontation played out against a backdrop of expanding violence. Azerbaijan accused Iran on Thursday of launching drone strikes on an international airport in its Nakhchivan exclave, injuring civilians. Tehran denied targeting its neighbor. If the accusation is accurate, it means Iranian munitions are now landing in a country that borders both Turkey and Armenia, widening the geographic footprint of a conflict that began as a bilateral confrontation and is now touching states that never asked to be involved. And then there is Hormuz. Reports say Iran has decided that only Chinese vessels will be allowed to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway between Iran and Oman that carries roughly a fifth of the world's seaborne oil. The move is described as a gesture of gratitude toward Beijing for its stance during the war. An IRGC official claimed its forces now control the strait, a claim not independently verified. The official told Fars news agency that any vessel attempting to pass risks damage from missiles or drones. They have described the waterway as an active military zone. Ship movements through the strait are reported to have slowed significantly. Countries such as the United Arab Emirates and Qatar, which rely on Hormuz for access to global markets, now face a choke point controlled by a nation at war. The impact is already measurable. According to data from Lloyd's List Intelligence, roughly 200 crude oil and product tankers are now stranded in the Gulf. Multiple marine insurers are reported to have raised premiums for vessels in the region. An Iranian official had earlier threatened to set fire to any ship attempting to pass. There are also reports that the Iranian military has fired on several vessels in the area, according to multiple outlets. President Trump responded by announcing that the U.S. Navy would begin escorting tankers through the strait if necessary. He said Washington would ensure the free flow of energy to the world. He also said he had ordered the U.S. Development Finance Corporation to provide political risk insurance and guarantees for maritime trade traveling through the Gulf. Following Trump's statement, oil prices dropped back slightly. But the underlying disruption has not been resolved. Experts are skeptical that Washington's measures will be enough. Richard Meade, editor-in-chief of Lloyd's List, said it remains unclear whether the president's assurances will address the safety concerns driving the disruption. He pointed to previous attacks on ships in the Red Sea. Those incidents prompted many shipping companies to avoid the route altogether, choosing longer and more expensive alternatives, even with U.S. military intervention in place. "Just because you have got a naval escort does not mean to say you are safe," Meade said. Analysts are now warning that if the disruption continues, crude oil prices could surge above $100 a barrel. That would hit petrol prices globally, including in the United States, despite its domestic production. Trump acknowledged the conflict could lead to higher oil prices for a little while, but dismissed concerns about a lasting impact. As soon as this ends, those prices are going to drop, I believe, even lower than before, Trump said. That is a bet on a short war. Many analysts doubt the conflict will be brief, given current conditions. Return to Beijing. China is the largest buyer of Iranian oil. Most of those supplies pass through Hormuz. A prolonged blockade would directly threaten China's energy security. The exclusive passage arrangement, if it holds, protects Beijing's supply chain while every other importing nation scrambles. Some analysts interpret Beijing's stance as leveraging its position, not merely neutrality. And Mao Ning's call for an immediate ceasefire reads differently when China is the only country whose tankers can still move. Beijing is simultaneously calling for peace and benefiting from the war's most consequential disruption. The contradiction is not accidental. It is the strategy. Beijing calls for dialogue. Moscow promises to make the operations impossible. China's official language positions it as a peacemaker, while Russia's positions emphasize its counterweight role. The language differs. The alignment does not. Both have positioned themselves against the U.S. Israeli military campaign. Both maintain strategic relationships with Tehran, and both are using the crisis to challenge Washington's ability to set the terms of the conflict unilaterally. 20% of the world's oil, one narrow maritime corridor, missile threats from Iran, naval escort warnings from Washington, China positioned as the only approved passage. The Strait of Hormuz is no longer just a trade route, it is a front line. And the question is no longer whether this war will disrupt the global economy. It is how deeply, how long, and who controls the choke point when it ends. Subscribe to WLA for daily geopolitical analysis.